Something that I feel very passionate about is helping to heal and clear emotions that are being held in the body so that not only the client becomes free from depression or anxiety or grief, but it also prevents it from developing into something physical.
Welcome to Exploring the Mystical Side of Life with your host, Linda Lang.
This is Linda Lang from ThoughtChange.com. We are exploring the mystical side of life once again this week. If you enjoy our conversations, remember to subscribe, share with a friend. Today, I have Ellie Pechet with me. Ellie is a remote healer and longtime metaphysician. Welcome, Ellie.
Thank you, Linda. It's very nice to be with you.
Working with people, working with emotions, working with patterns, pulling them out of the body. Tell me, how did you get started on this path?
I have several stories, but the most important one, I think, is I was working as a counselor in a mainstream counseling facility, and a young woman was referred to me as a client. She was probably around 13 years old, and her mother had died suddenly in a car accident due to intoxication. And so the daughter had no closure, and all of a sudden her mother was gone, and she was very, um, very troubled and really struggling, and started to go down the path of alcohol, dabbling a little bit in drugs, boys. And so her school psychologist sent her to my agency. She was assigned to me, no accident, because I'm also a medium. And her first session, her mother came through really strong, like gangbusters, and obviously had been wanting to connect with her daughter for a long time, and was able to connect with me and asked me to bring her through. And I said, I definitely want to bring you through. It's really important, but let me build a little bit of rapport with your daughter, and I think I'll be able to bring you through her next session. And I built a rapport with the daughter. She felt very comfortable with me. And the next week, when she came back, her mother was there, of course, and again, was very persistent in asking me to bring her through so she could communicate with her daughter through me and let her know what happened, and give her, advice, and most important, bring her daughter closure. So I did bring her through gently at first, and the daughter was very open, and it ended up being a very intense communication between the two of them through me, if that makes sense. And it felt so good to bring her closure and for her to connect with her mother, which she had been wanting so much for years. So she was so excited that the next day when she went to school, she told the school psychologist about her session and me bringing her mother in. And then the psychologist did not understand this type of thing at all. She was very mainstream, and called the agency, and I was fired. And so that was really my little push by the universe to go out on my own and start my own private practice full-time, doing counseling and energy healing and mediumship when it was necessary.
And the new path appeared, right?
Brand new path. My more intended path, yes.
Yeah. I always like when those in the medical community actually open their mind to allow the possibility of energy and that whole kind of metaphysical side, but it doesn't always happen. I'm glad you found your way to where you needed to be so you can help the people you're here to help.
Yes. Thank you.
So you must have always been intending to be of service to people, to heal, to work with their emotions and their patterns to help them shift, even as a counselor.
This has been another huge life of service. It's been really the majority of my life is being of service with people. I also have helped many pets. I've been able to diagnose and heal things that the vet couldn't, like a client's cat who was bleeding from the rectum. The vet didn't know what it was, and the client had me do a remote session. In fact, I'm pretty sure they're in Canada also. And I diagnosed an ulcer in the first session, and I healed it also in the first session, and the bleeding stopped, and she was fine. So yes, people, pets, and then I've also done a lot of service with wildlife, and I go where I'm needed. I can astro travel anywhere on the planet. And so I've stayed busy working, helping, being of service.
Absolutely. And like me doing this type of healing, we know the effect that emotions can have on the body, and not only the body, even through subconscious patterns as well.
Yes, absolutely. And that's really something that I feel very passionate about, is helping to heal and clear emotions that are being held in the body, so that not only the client becomes free, from depression or anxiety or grief, but it also prevents it from developing into something physical eventually, like, well, stomach issues, digestion, even cancer, heart issues, heart disease, which is heart dis-ease, and comes from unresolved broken heart. It could be a broken heart from the love of one's life, or it could be numerous broken hearts from losing loved ones. Even I worked with a woman dealing with cancer, and her first session, I cleared broken heart from losing many pets as well as people.
We're human beings. We have emotions. Some people are very connected with their emotions and seem like they're in a bath of emotional energy all the time. And then there's other people who seem more stoic, like maybe more detached from their emotions. Which would you say is better, those who live in their emotional soup or those who just try and deal with their emotions and then get on with it, let's say?
That's a good question. I think it's important to be as balanced as possible, and it takes work, as we both know, to keep ourselves in balance. And, there are different things that can affect how emotional a person tends to be, like what astrological sign and the rest of their astrological makeup is. For example, I'm mostly water, so I tend to run on emotions, and that's also why I can tune into most things and have the empathy of others. I mean, it's no accident, right?
It can be a huge gift, absolutely.
Yeah,
And yet, if your emotions kind of run amok, it's very hard for you to stay grounded and functioning.
right.
I'm curious if you found that both of those two extreme ways of being, can they cause issues either in the physical body or repetitive patterns?
That's where, honoring oneself and honoring one's makeup and their authentic nature is really important. That and working to stay balanced, and also healing issues that have come up, whether in this life experiences, uh, traumatic experiences, painful memories, or past lifetimes. I happen to, with my technique, I clear both. So I clear the issue in this life that presents itself, and then I clear it in all past lifetimes, which I don't see, and it's not important to be able to see them. What's important is to clear the pattern.
How would people know that they have emotional baggage or stuck emotions?
Great question, Linda. So most people understand the term triggers now. And so based on their triggers, what triggers them, usually whatever triggers a person is an issue that can be resolved so that it deals with the trigger and it doesn't continue to happen.
Some people feel very justified in their triggers.
Hmm. Well, what do you think of that?
I think maybe a good way of understanding a trigger is when your emotional reaction is over and above what is warranted in a situation.
Yes.
And sometimes we can't see that ourselves because we're in the emotion, but anybody around us would be able to let us know.
Right. And that's a really good indicator is, when something happens, there's sort of an appropriate level of reaction, whether it's anger or frustration, and then there's over the top anger and frustration. And I think it's pretty, I think people can have a good sense of when it's warranted, when the reaction is warranted, and when it's over the top and there's an issue there. And that's, calling for healing.
Yeah, absolutely. If they want to do their healing work, it will be apparent for them, right?
Yeah. And if they don't want to, like you mentioned, people who don't think that they have an issue, that's okay. It might not be their time to do the healing. And maybe this life, even maybe they're meant to experience what they're experiencing. And so there's no judgment. There's just what is, and everyone is different. People that are open to healing will get the healing. They'll find the healing that they need.
I think you made a really, really good point that some people, that is their life path. Some people are maybe destined or it's been written into their path that they have these experiences for whatever the soul needs to grow in this lifetime.
That's right. You and I both know that we agree to a contract before we incarnate, and it's to learn and have certain experiences to increase our growth as a soul. And again, there's no judgment. It's really about just doing what we're here to do, why we incarnated, and what we're here to learn.
Can you explain a little bit about how detrimental these pockets of energy when they're stuck in our body, how they can start to create physical issues?
Yeah, I could share a story of a client who his physical health was declining and he was on oxygen, and someone brought me to his house. She was very concerned about him and worried, and I think she just had an intuitive feeling that I could help him. And so I went to his house, and he had to walk around with an oxygen tank wherever he went. And so when I did a session with him and we talked, what surfaced, and this is often what happens, was the love of his life disappeared. She was kidnapped, and it literally broke his heart. And this was like 15 or 20 years before I met him that this happened. And so the broken heart, it just continued to affect him, and his physical health was impacted to the point where he needed to be on the oxygen tank, and he was literally declining. So in that session, I cleared his broken heart about losing the love of his life. And it was really powerful. And the next day, literally the next day, he didn't need the oxygen. He wasn't walking around with it, wasn't dependent on it, because I had healed the cause of the decline, and by healing his broken heart, he was able to live a much healthier life, physically and emotionally.
So, do you think the root of the disruptive energy is our inability to actually process the circumstances that we experience? Is that where we get stuck?
I would say that yes, that's how emotions get stuck in the body, because a lot of times it is difficult for people to process difficult emotions and difficult experiences, and that's why they need help. They need someone who can be objective and who's gifted and can clear whatever the issues are, the priority.
Do you have any tips for anybody in the moment that can help them to process that energy? Because these are like big, big life experiences that they're having that they feel like they have no control over. And perhaps they don't over what's happened to them, but they certainly do have control over how they respond, right?
Yes, I would encourage people to meditate and to take time and journal and do some processing of their feelings and whatever the experience is that way. And then if they still need help, they can reach out to someone like myself or yourself. And so there are different approaches that can be used as needed. But yeah, I would start with meditating and journaling for people to get clear about what it is that how they're feeling, what they're upset about, and if more action needs to be taken or not.
I'm curious, Ellie, what do you think about support groups? I think of like the grief support groups and there's probably anger management groups and there's quite a gamut of support groups. Do you have any feelings about that?
I do, especially when it comes to grief. I think that grief is probably one of my very favorite things to heal for my clients, and I can usually heal it in 1 or 2 sessions, and so that they can get back on their feet. Like the testimonial in which Paige described her first session, me clearing the grief about losing her son, his first year in college, to murder. And she had been shut down, and literally her life had stopped for 7 years. And I was able to clear it in that first session. The issue that I have with grief support groups is that it keeps the grief going. It keeps it, a live issue in which the people that are going to the support groups keep talking about it, and the grief, it's like it's the focus of their life. And my mission is always to get people past the grief so that it's not running their life. And if they're at peace about the person that they lost, then they can focus on the rest of their life and be in a good place.
I agree, actually, Ellie. I find for many people it's helpful at the beginning, but then it keeps them stuck.
Yes.
I'd like to know a little bit more about your healing technique. What do you call it?
The Pechet Healing Technique.
And this is something you developed, correct?
It's something I developed over the many years, 33 years. And what I do is every session I'll meet with the client, usually remotely. And it's pretty uncanny how what needs to be healed that session will sort of bubble up to the surface in our conversation, and they'll bring it up and they'll start talking about it. And as they're doing that, I'm tuning in at the same time that we're talking to see exactly what needs to be healed, like the exact wording. One word can throw off the healing. So I will listen for it. And then at one point while we're talking, all of a sudden I'll hear the phrase that needs to be cleared. And then I'll muscle test it to make sure. And then I run it by the client, and it's almost always spot on. And I'll ask them what, I use a pain scale, and I'll ask them what number it feels like, 0 to 10, 10 being the highest level of charge. And it's usually between an 8 and a 10, sometimes even more than that. And then I'll balance them, raise their vital life force, clear the issue. And it almost always starts at a higher number and then goes down, ending up usually at a 1 or a 2, sometimes a 0. And the healing will continue after the session over the next, day or 2 or 3 days. The last thing I do is an imprint for something that they need and that their soul wants for them. So if someone was hopeless, for example, I'll clear them feeling hopeless, and then the imprint might be hopeful, and they feel really good and deeply relaxed by the end of the session.
When you talk about the world of energy, I mean, changes can happen very quickly and go very deeply and also branch out and shift other things. When you say you listen for the words, I mean, that's a beautiful skill. That's something I do with my clients too, that you read their energy while they're talking. You can tell if what they're saying they don't believe, they maybe want to believe it, or a certain word just kind of throws their energy off. And when you can shift that for them, so many things shift. So when somebody actually does release some of this stuck emotion, how how do they know? Like I know I've worked with many people, I'm sure you have too, and they say, "Oh, I thought I dealt with that, but here it is again, and here they are in their emotions," right? So how can they tell?
Well, that's why I use a pain scale, because it's like evidence, that they can write down the number. Oh, this issue is a 9 or a 10, this trauma or this memory or how I feel about the ex. And as I'm working with them, the number is literally going down. And by the end of the session, they will experience that it's down to like a 0 or a 1. And so that's like clear evidence that the charge has been diminished and dissolved from clearing it.
I think I would also say that there is a change in the inner state.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the number scale is a more technical, concrete way to judge the process, but it is based on feeling much more relaxed about whatever it is that I've just cleared and at peace. And the thing is that most issues only need to be dealt with once, especially when they're emotional. So, like with Paige, who was grieving her son for 7 years until we met that first session, she was completely at peace by the end of the session. So, yeah, people tell me they feel super relaxed and at peace about whatever it is that was troubling them. And sometimes it's subconscious, which is very important to clear, because those are the issues that can turn into physical conditions if they're not dealt with and healed.
So what would you say about resistance? And I'm talking about subconscious resistance when I ask that.
Um, well, I mean,
I'll give you an example for
yeah,
grief. Maybe it's someone who feels guilty that they survived and their loved one didn't, or they feel like it's their duty to grieve for them because it keeps the memory alive. We know that's not really true, and it's not what the crossed over person wants for their loved one here. But there can sometimes be that resistance to letting the emotion go for some justification that they've told themselves once upon a time and they've attached to it.
Yeah. Well, I guess the question I would ask someone who was still attached to holding on to the emotion is, what purpose is it serving? And is it helping them in their life? And usually the answer will be no. I know the people who come to me are ready to heal and they don't want to be holding on to resistance or painful emotions. And that's why they reach out for help.
Now, Ellie, you have written a book, not exactly on emotional healing, more on your shamanic work. What's the title of your book?
Hitching a Ride, a guide to earthbound spirits and how they affect you.
And is there any connection between carrying this emotional baggage and then also carrying the baggage of perhaps these attachments?
That's a good point, Linda. So there can be a connection. People who have unresolved issues from the past, from childhood, trauma, anxiety, depression, can be more prone to attracting earthbound spirits and other types of entities. So that's a really good reason right there to to heal unresolved issues from the past, because it makes the person stronger, their energy field is stronger, they're more vibrant, they're happier, and they're less likely to attract a negative entity or earthbound spirit.
You also literally feel lighter because you're not carrying the weight of energy, whether it's emotional or in entity form.
Yep, absolutely.
Now, Ellie, where can we send people who might want to know more about your work?
My website is phoenixrisinghealing.com. And it's Phoenix like the bird rising out of the ashes, phoenixrisinghealing.com. And people can contact me through the website.
Ellie, you have a beautiful quote from one of your clients. I would love it if you could read it for our listeners.
I'd be happy to. Greg McHugh in Denver, Colorado, sent me this quote. He's a board certified regression therapist. And he writes, "There is no healing more perfect than totally clearing the obstructions that the soul has been carrying in this life, so the light of the inner being can shine freely, and there is hardly a memory of what had been the deep wound or presenting issue." This is Ellie's service, returning us to our true nature. Ellie's work and presence is a true blessing for us all.
Beautiful. Ellie, thank you so much for being my guest today.
Thanks for having me on.
And thank you for listening to this week's edition of Exploring the Mystical Side of Life. You will find all of our conversations on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform. Come visit me at thoughtchange.com. You can pick up your copy of Learning to Listen and explore the world of energy healing. That's it for this week. We'll see you again next time. Bye for now.